We'll get it there in just a minute, guys. Let me get to the live screen. Here we go. I just had a single click. It's Audrey hosting Be Growth Driven. Always entertaining, always here for a good laugh. And we have a great guest today. Not so much laughs, but amazing information from Jason McKee. I'm going to bring up to the stage right now. Good afternoon, Jason. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Audrey. Thanks for having me.
It's been a few weeks since we saw each other, and I know you've been speaking a lot about this at different events, so we're glad to have you here. I did a live on Instagram. Everybody who owns a business needs to know what you know, or that has a website. Should I say that?
Right. Any digital presence.
Yes, which is the way everybody's going. So before we dive into what you do and how you can help all of us, I wanted to ask a little bit about your career path, because this is Be Growth Driven. It's about how you get to where you are, where you're going from here. But how did you get to this point? I'm sure when you started out in business or in life, you were not seeking out of high school saying, I am going to help people in this respect. Tell us a little bit about your career path.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I say I didn't really take the traditional path, but I don't really meet many people who take a traditional path. When you're young, you think that life's just going to put these things in front of you, and that's just the way it's going to go. But I remember when I was really young, I wanted to be a veterinarian. My girlfriend's uncle was a vet, so we went and stayed with him for a weekend in Pittsburgh, and I got to do help on operations and the whole business. And I did not want to be a vet anymore. I was like, I liked animals, and I was like, that's not this job. This job is completely different than that. And that was my first lesson in what we think something's going to be versus what it becomes.
Yeah.
So I was an English major. I loved, reading books and talking about, big picture type stuff in life. And my parents were like, you can't make any money. Like, what are you doing? You can't make any money. That's not a business idea. And my parents are business oriented. My brother.
I say that to our son. You can't make money that way. I know what you love, but that's not going to pay the bills. I
replay those conversations with my dad in my mind, and I'm like, what was I thinking? My poor dad, but like, that's not the way the world works. You have to survive. But I didn't really have a passion for anything that made money, except I did like advertising and the creative aspect of that I thought was fun. So when I graduated college in 1996, and the internet was just becoming something. And it was exciting times because I didn't really have the pedigree or the credentials to go like Madison Avenue and be a big advertising person. But people were putting things online and they needed help. So I figured out how all that worked. And that's how I got into like the advertising and marketing side of things, which I loved. And that went very well. And I thought, just a few years ago, I thought that was what I was going to do forever. And I was very successful and thought I had so many things figured out. And then on September 25th, 2018, I walked into a conference room to meet a potential client, and I heard a screen reader. I heard the sound of someone who could not see using the internet, and it stopped me in my tracks. It changed my career path. It changed my personal life. It changed everything. And that's what I talk about now is how these different perspectives of disabled people, how they use the internet, and what we need to do as business owners and marketers to make sure that they can use it.
Yes. So that was my next question. What led you to this? Now, you have one line of work, you're going to a meeting, and I just can't believe the experience you had that something stopped you in your tracks and you pivoted from there. So tell us a little bit more about, because some people might not know what a screen reader is. I only knew it because I had done a little bit of research. For some reason, I had done some research and I knew what it was, but share a little bit more about this so people know.
Yeah. And I was like you, I had no knowledge about this at all. And that was one of the things that stopped me when and I talk about this in some of my talks, but when I heard that noise, it stopped me because I'd never heard that noise before. I think something in the back part of my brain was telling me that's the English language you're hearing, but it's going so fast that you can't make out what's happening there. So I had to process that, and then processing the gentleman in front of me who I did not know was going to be blind. And I was just thinking I was going to go in there and pitch some marketing tactics, and all of a sudden I'm dealing with
yeah. So your meeting was with him. This was your client you were meeting.
Yeah, and prospective client. So it was supposed to be, we're going to do some marketing for you, but it turned into him, obviously opening my eyes to what his position was and his perspective was. But also, once we started talking about that, and he was very honest and candid, and so was I. And I was asking questions about, how does this work for you? And then how did you learn how to do this? And what is the website doing to let you listen to it? How does that? It says screen reader, which means that his cursor is going off of what the HTML is, and it's reading it back to him. It sounds very simple, and it's been around almost as long as the web itself, these screen reader technologies, but there's some nuance to it. It can only read back things if the schematic is correct, if it's actually done, which is not complicated. There are very basic rules in how we code things, but we're not taught those rules. I wasn't taught those rules. All the developers I've worked with in my career, they were never taught those rules. And that was the second thing that kept me stuck in my steps there was, why didn't I know about this? I thought I was this, successful tech guy who knew so many things. And this goes from running my own business and knocking on doors and saying, can I build you a website, to working on 8-figure accounts with big corporations. None of this had ever come up. And not in any single meeting in 20 years had anybody told me that people with different abilities are using the web in a different way. So at that meeting, he told me, and the guy was kind of, he's a New York guy, he's in your face, he's not pulling any punches, and he was pissed off.
We know New York. We know, and you're Philly, but we know New York.
So it's similar, right? Where you guys, you're in where are you based?
Nebraska.
So you're much more polite than we are on this side.
We are, but I do calls to New York. I have experienced cold calling to New York.
So, and he just lost his vision late in life. This was a thing where he had suffered an illness and the doctors misdiagnosed it. And he woke up and he couldn't see anymore. That was it.
It'd be so frustrating.
Yeah, and now the more I get into this, though, these stories, not to
share
you, but these things happen every day. And the thing that at first it scared me because I would talk to the guy he's a chef, and he was riding his bike to work, and a car bumped him into a guardrail, and he just hit his head wrong, and he's paralyzed from the neck down. And all these things, at first I got really scared, but then the more I got to know these people, the more I'm like, you know what? If all these people have this personality and this ability and this drive after all these things, I probably will too. If I, God forbid, if one of these things happened to me, look at all these other people I've met that have dealt with it, and they're raising families, they're working, they're building companies. Mm-hmm. So the other side of that was, the worst, I always used to think the worst thing I wouldn't be able to see, that would be the scariest thing in the world. Well, maybe it isn't. Maybe it seems like the scariest thing, but the scariest thing right now to me is that the world isn't listening to me. I'm trying to explain to these businesses, and that's the other part of this conversation was not just, hey, these websites don't work for me. It was, this is the law. This isn't an optional thing. You don't do this because you want to feel good or because your business is focused on the disabled community. No. If you're making money in the United States of America and you have a website, this applies to you. I don't care how many employees you have. I don't care how much money you make. Now, if you have a really small company and you're making, I think, less than $500,000 a year, maybe $1 million, and you have less than like 5 employees, you can write off the work to make the website accessible. There's tax incentives to do this for smaller companies. So you get because if you have a small business and they come in and say, hey, you need a wheelchair ramp here. You didn't have one and you have to do this. There's incentives for those type of physical infrastructure improvements.
No.
They exist. You can argue for that with your accountant for the digital side as well. But that's really, and that's how we met at that show and everything. And this is kind of what I'm on, I'm mission driven right now, is to get the word out, because it's when people like you and I have this conversation, and we had a great talk there in Kansas City, mm-hmm. and I could see that in your eyes, you're getting it the way I got it. You're like, oh my God, I didn't know. What do I do? And that's usually the reaction. But when you don't know and no one's telling you, then you're still going along in this ignorance and non-compliance and risk. And the fact that plus 20% of users, according to the CDC, are using assistive technologies to some degree to get to your website, to fill out your form. And in our business and marketing and lead generation, filling out those forms, that's where the money is. That's where the innovation is, the technology, that's where the effort is.
Yep.
And none of these forms are compliant. None of these forms are usable, let alone compliant. Like we do demonstrations for companies all the time. I just did one for a big player that you and I would both recognize the name, who's part of that lead gen, that world that we kind of circulate in. Mm-hmm. And we just demonstrated through video that what it's like for someone to try to fill out your form to apply for a loan. It's impossible. 20% of people who are bouncing onto those pages can't. I mean, now we're not talking about, the best for mankind and all this philosophical, this is a great. No. Now we're talking dollars and cents. There's two out of 10 people aren't able to give you what you want. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. You're quantifying it for them so that they can understand the seriousness. Now, that's interesting. On a one-on-one, you would have a video showing them how this works. Is this something that could be found on your site? Do you have examples of this so that people could understand?
No, I don't have anything, just for the sheer reason that most clients they get upset when they realize how that's the hardest part of my job right now is, and Rob Sieber talks about this at the Leads Council, because we worked on his site and there was, I think, 800 violations on the homepage. And he was so upset. He's like, he takes it personal. And
he was so genuine though, too. He was so genuine. He goes, I cannot believe there was this many. He's
such an amazing guy. He really, when he heard about this, and it probably took me 6 to 9 months to get him on the phone, because I knew he was the guy to talk to about this.
Yeah.
He's very busy, TCPA and CCPA and everything else that's going on in his world. And he told me when I finally got him on the phone, he's like, I don't need another headache for my clients. He's like, I'm already navigating all this regulation. They're getting fined. We're trying to keep up with this and that. And you're telling me there's something else to worry about. But he does get it. And he realized it was important for a million reasons. So we worked on it. So and my site, by the way, is not live right now. We're just rolling out a new one. So There's nothing there.
We won't share the link.
But we will, I will do, I'm working on some case studies right now, and I'll put those on, and there'll be a little bit of the back and forth about what we ran into with clients and how we overcame it.
Good. Because even just hearing a screen reader reading something wrong at all, any of this would be very interesting, I think, and eye-opening. When I was doing a promo for this on my personal Instagram, I said you can't be ignorant once you know, because this is important, especially as a small business owner. The last thing, maybe this is wrong to say, the last thing you could afford is a lawsuit for something simple you could have fixed that you need to do. So don't go like this. Don't say, oh, it's okay. You can't do that.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the surge in lawsuits right now. And that's the usual thing every year. In 2018, the section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, this is the law that applies to all government. If you're using government money or higher ed money in any way, Section 508 is your requirement, your compliance that you're looking for. That was updated with WCAG. This is WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are the standards that we're using to determine if the code is compliant for the disabled or not. And these are put out by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, w3c.org. It's all public. It's all available. But this article was talking about the surge in lawsuits. So in 2018, Section 508 was amended to include WCAG 2.0 AA, which is what the average private company would need to, the standard that they would need to be held to in the U.S. here. But the ADA also is used for these lawsuits. Now, the ADA law says you're not allowed to discriminate based on ability. So the lawyers come in and say, well, this disabled person can't use your website, therefore you're discriminating. And these cases, 99.99 times are settled out of court. Someone writes a check and that's it. So there's not a lot of documentation, but
that doesn't fix the problem.
It doesn't fix the problem. And if you don't fix the problem, you can get sued again. Hooters was famously sued for this, wrote a check, and the next day sued again for the same thing by a different person, and argued to the court that we just got sued for this. And the judge said, you didn't fix it. Somebody else can sue you tomorrow. You have to fix the problem. Yeah. But the Wall Street Journal article, the interesting thing that I wanted to bring up was that I think it was 50% or 75% of the lawsuits filed this year so far have been against companies making less than 10 million, I think, in gross revenue. So they're going after the smaller companies, which you would think that they would go after the low hanging fruit of the big companies, but big companies are catching on. Every company in Silicon Valley has an accessibility team, and they're hiring. They have a huge amount of openings for now. They're not always compliant. Everyone has issues, but this law is basically saying you have to work toward compliance. So as TCPA, you're not allowed to call this person. That's a fine. That's black and white. Mm-hmm. This is more like, are you working toward being accessible? And if you are, then you have a legitimate defendable position. So the bigger companies, they get it now. They're not, like I said, they're not compliant. They're not all doing it correctly. But the ones that are on the hook are the ones that are, 10 employees. They're doing 7 million this year. They're a low hanging fruit for the lawyers because they know the lawyers know that they can get them to write a check for 20 or 30 grand right now, as long as they threaten them in a demand letter saying, your code isn't compliant. Most business owners like us, we're not going to know what that means. Like, how do we test it? How do we validate that? Do we find a special lawyer to help us? 20 grand is easier than all those other steps that you'll go through. So that's where a lot of these cases are ending up.
Interesting. And considering the pandemic in the time period, everything was online. So this probably became an even bigger blow up.
Yeah, the pandemic, the silver lining in my industry was just a spotlight on us. I mean, when you think about a disabled person, let's say they're paralyzed or blind or deaf or both, and they're living in a studio apartment in Manhattan, and they're told they're not allowed to go outside, and you can't go to the store, just use your phone, use your computer, and none of the services and sites are compliant, and they don't have friends and family. But imagine the hell that is being lived thousands or millions of times across this country during this pandemic. So
they're making me cry. And I know that I'm not emotional. But yeah, I mean, that'd be a powerful PSA right there.
It is. And it should be. And that's what I'm trying to do now is, since we have that little bit of momentum, as terrible as this has been for everybody.
Yeah.
We know companies, small and large, they're rethinking, having physical office space. They're rethinking how they get together with their employees and their clients. A lot of what we do and what we know as a business is being rethought. Let's add this into that rethink. Let's roll this in as well.
Yes. Now, great question here. Where should we go to, or what should we do to take steps as a company, as a business owner who has a website, to be compliant? What's one first step? Could you tell us? Maybe two.
Yeah. Well, the first step is testing. There's no automatic solution for this. Some people are selling them disingenuously. They're selling them. They don't work. There's people that'll go on and they'll tell someone like you or me, hey, look at this button. We add this here on your website. It fixes everything.
Oh.
But they don't work. So what I tell people all the time is try to get someone who understands this accessibility in a native way. So I have people on my team who are disabled, but they're also certified experts in testing. They're also, JavaScript program. I mean, these people are amazing. They just happen to be disabled. Therefore, when they are testing your site, they're letting you know in a lot of these videos and demos we do, they're saying, this is me trying to use your site, and this is my disability, and this is the technology I'm using. Now, it doesn't matter what technology they use. You have to be compliant for all of it. It's a universal standard. So if you make it compliant for a screen reader, it'll be compliant. For a Braille reader, it'll be compliant. For a sip and puff straw, for someone who's paralyzed, it'll be compliant for all of these devices that are used. So the first thing a business owner needs to do is say, where are people engaging with me online, and has that been tested for accessibility? And if so, who tested it and how did they test it? Because the only way we do it, and the only way that it can be done, is through manually testing using these devices. Now, there's groups that, like if you're going to call a plumber, that plumber is going to have some kind of, and I talk about this quite a bit as well, because it just shocks me. Like if you want a plumber or an electrician to come to your house and do some work, there's all kinds of licensing and standards and regulations and schooling and training and apprenticeships. These people come in knowing their role, knowing what their job is, so that they don't ruin your property or jeopardize someone's life or cause a fire or whatever. Right. That doesn't exist online. You hire somebody because they're a programmer. You look at their portfolio, they know what they're doing. They know more than you do about code, so you hire them. These standardizations is what we want to focus on. So there's a group called the International Association for Accessibility Professionals, or the IAAP. and that's a nonprofit, and they offer strenuous exams for people to get certified as a professional accessibility tester. So you can look for someone who has that designation. That means that they've been proven to know how these things are supposed to work on a website, and that gives you a little bit of a credibility. Or you can just call me and I'll help you as well.
Perfect. Because honestly, how much competition do you have? Not that we're talking, but I'm like, how many companies do this? This is impactful.
Yeah, I don't think I have any direct competition, just because of, the way that I approach this and what I've learned over the years. The consultancy is really the sweet spot for companies that want to get this problem fixed. They don't want to get gouged. So there's a lot of companies out there that say, hey, if you give me $25,000 per year per domain, I'll take care of everything for you. Now, that's expensive, number one, especially for companies that have 500 websites or whatever. That gets very expensive, but it's also an ongoing thing, and it requires them to be working in your code and butting heads with your senior directors of technology and programmers. Now, all of a sudden, it's somebody else in the sandbox. They may not be getting along with whoever else is there. You can have a million different things go wrong. If I just get someone to sign up and just put one of my testers in with their team, that's not going to go well. And that's the only model I've seen with my competitors. That's really all they do. So what I do is consult with the business owner and the tech people and say, what do you know? What do you understand about this? And then we'll do a demonstration. I'll introduce them to my team. And my team, like I said, there's people with disabilities with great personalities, and they'll just explain, this is how I get through the life. This is how I navigate, and this is what I need, and this is why. And when you do it that way, whoever the programmer is, they're like, oh, okay, I understand why we're doing this. Now, what's involved? What do I have to do? And then a lot of these people are so smart and so tech savvy. As soon as you steer them in the right direction, they get it. So we stay in the background. We offer some testing, maybe quarterly, to make sure that you're on track. We monitor things for you. But a lot of it's an education process for the development team that you already have on staff and you're already paying. We try to leverage that.
Nice. Yeah, because that's very interesting. Because I'm thinking of our sites. I'm thinking of customers we work with. So, because you definitely, the advertising marketing agencies around the world need to know about you. Well, worldwide, yes, but this is strictly laws within the U.S., correct? What you deal with?
Well, yes. So there's multiple laws around the world right now for this. So GDPR is what you have, and most of it, when you and I run into this stuff, most of the time it's for data privacy. That's the real thing that's driving the regulations right now.
Right.
So CCPA is about Silicon Valley, their home turf, saying you're not allowed to leverage people's information anymore. The way you guys are doing it, and CCPA is basically mirroring what GDPR has been doing. So GDPR is for Europe, Western Europe. Canada has its own. Toronto has its own accessibility law. It's very strict. There's some times in there where it says, well, if your website's more than 10 years old, we'll give you this much time to fix it or whatever. If you make less than this, there's some variations on how it gets implemented. But the Western world, almost every country has some kind of law governing this. And a lot of places that I wouldn't expect. I ran into places like Kuwait in the Middle East, very strict accessibility. It's just no nonsense. If you're going to be online, the government wants you to make sure that everyone can use it. And so I bump into this stuff all the time. But what you say about advertising agencies, Audrey, that is so, I think I'm very fortunate because that's where I come from. And I know what we do as agencies in that world. And so I understand a little bit about what the challenges we already have. But we are, as an advertising agency, like you're the fulcrum for all these companies to get their business done. You provide the campaigns and the infrastructure and all the traffic and the leads and everything else for every business to get their business done. So it's a really good spot for me to kind of nudge in there and for these agencies to say, this is another thing. Because once this is added to your testing, your QA on before you roll something out, it's going to be simple and it's going to be quick and it's not going to be expensive, but it's that learning curve that we're trying to get through.
So since your website is down, how can people, like if we have business owners watching right now who say, I know I need this, let's roll. What can they do, Jason? Should they reach out to us to connect with you? Look you up on LinkedIn? What's the process going to be here? Yeah, we're hoping to wake some people up here, honestly.
It'd be great, Audrey, if they reach out to me through you or LinkedIn is fine. either way, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm leaving tomorrow for another show. I'm always on stage somewhere, running my mouth like I am now about this stuff. So I bump into people in the real world too. But yeah, please feel free to send anybody my way, and let's talk about your situation. Let's talk about your sites and let's demonstrate for you and your team what it's like, because it's not gonna be a finger wag at this is wrong. It's going to be you probably didn't understand this before, but the form submission, which is really, it's so critical for everybody's business. When I hit submit on that form, if there's an error somewhere and I can't see that screen, what's happening? We do this all the time where we have testers, they'll do the demonstration, they'll hit submit, and we'll intentionally put in an error. That's how we test forms. And it'll outline the fields in red, and it'll just sit there. And the person testing for everyone is blind, and they're like, I can't see what's happening. And then they'll curtain their screen so that everybody's screen goes dark. And they'll say, okay, now we're all in my world. This is what I see every day. I just submitted a form for this loan. What should I do next? And there's always a pregnant pause there. Everyone's like, oh my God, like, what do we do here? And it's simple labeling. It's simple things. And that's where we get a lot of this understanding, this moment of, oh, okay, I get it. Now what do we do? Yeah. So I like to get in front of anybody who, and I don't charge, most of the stuff is prospecting. We're just talking about things, demonstrating things. I'm confident I'm going to get the business because we are experts at it and everyone needs it. And there's not a lot of people out there offering it. So I'm happy to walk people through things. I can do this for you and your team.
Yeah.
And just show what it's like. And maybe we can even do a case study with your sites, and we can do another one of these.
Yes.
And come back and say, this is what we saw and this is what we learned.
Perfect. We would share our information. Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yes. That's a future show. Well, behind the scenes, take note of this and mark it down. Yes. Yeah, because I'm thinking this is the soapbox you want to be on. This is the best soapbox. And it is baffling when you realize there's no, not from a business money perspective, but just from a reality of nobody else is doing this. Nobody else is offering this. There's no other consultation. Like, that just blows my mind because there's so many businesses and so many websites. This should be a standard or a brag right. I have this seal on my website that I am compliant.
And that's the thing right now that I tell a lot of the bigger, and I'm trying to focus on the bigger brands right now just because they lead the way in so many ways for us at events and just in industry standards. And when you get these big players to agree to this, it really sets the stage for everybody else. So that's my mission right now. And the fact that this exists and nobody knows about it has been such a driving force. It's such an exciting thing to be part of because it's not just, we have to fix your web form or your landing page or something like that. It's much more fundamental to what we do as a society. This is big, and this is my English literature background coming in, but I see this as a shift in how we work in the digital realm. And I'm not the only one. Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, he still runs the W3C. And I'm a member of that. I help with some of the new standards that are being developed. And he developed a new internet called Inrupt. And because he's so frustrated with the way that that companies have handled people's data and privacy, and a lot of things have gone wrong and the way he sees it. So he wrote a Bill of Rights for the internet. He's like, this is what digital has to be. And the second one is accessibility. The first one is privacy. So this is it's called Inrupt. There's a website up. And it's hard to get everybody to use a different internet. Now that's very interesting. But this is the guy he's done amazing things already. So I think he's got some potential here. But it's funny that he sees this in this day and age when so many companies are just getting into the groove of how digital works and social media works, that the guy who started the whole thing for us is out there saying it's all wrong. We got to fix it. It's interesting and how long that's going to trickle through, but it's exciting for me that the privacy, the way he's handling it is when every human being has a pod of secret information about themselves and they decide their whole life forever who can access it and why and in what context. That's where it starts. And we did it the opposite way where it was Wild West. I mean, you and I have seen this industry. It's been crazy the things that happen. Like a Facebook can pop up. And in 2 years, everybody's business model changes. Then that's the stuff that we're still dealing with every day. which is why it's one of the reasons I love, being in marketing and in the digital space. But it's really brought into sharp relief the things where we're lacking. And this is where I planted my flag. I say, no, this is something that has got to be included in everything we do moving forward. And I got a big mouth, so I'm going to talk about it and push for it.
Same here. I like to be loud, especially when it's for a good thing. And it just still is shocking in 2021 that this is. I have to wonder what the creator. What'd you say his name was again?
Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He's been knighted. Sure. Yeah, he's the guy who was at CERN, which is, I guess, that think tank type organization where they built the collider, where the Hadron Collider,
the
biggest machine ever built. That's where he's working, and he's trying to share information between one researcher and the next. The internet exists. The HTTP protocol exists. That came from Vince Cerf, who, by the way, is deaf. And the reason he created the internet was because he wanted a way to woo the girl he fell in love with at Berkeley, who was also deaf, and they couldn't use telephones. So he signed up for this project put out by DARPA, by the government, to build this thing called the internet. He built the first 3 nodes, and then he said, okay, now I want to build something where we can communicate digitally, and that was email. And he did it because he's deaf. So this all comes full circle. And I don't know if I got to talk about this at the show that you were at, but there would be no Apple without people with disabilities. The company Apple started when Steve Jobs bought something called the blue box on the street and brought it back to Wozniak. This is before the garage. This is before anything else you know about Apple. Mm-hmm. But there is a YouTube video online at the it's a historical society of whatever county that he was living in then. So in the 80s, he does this talk about it, and there's a video on there. But he said he bought this blue box on the street for $100, and the blue box, if you went to a payphone and you dialed a long distance number, it would say, please deposit $3 to make the call or whatever. You put the box up there, and it would whistle a few tones, and it would fool the computer and the phone system to think that the money had been paid, and then it would open up the call. Well, the blue box was, and that's when we gave it to Wozniak, and he said, "Can we use digital and make this better?" And Wozniak said, "Yeah, of course." So they built it, and that was the first product. Now it was illegal; it was black market.
Yeah.
So they don't brag about it, but it was the first Apple product, and it came from a guy who legally changed his name to Joy Bubbles. He grew up in, I think he grew up in Minneapolis or something like that. By the time he was 9 years old, he had figured out, using his mother's kitchen telephone, that there was computers behind the scenes of the phones, and they were whistling these tunes to each other to open up connections. He would make long distance calls, and they would go, and all these little these bursts of sound. And he was born blind, so he was obsessed with the telephone, because on the telephone it was a level playing field for him. It didn't matter if he could see or not. So this obsession turned into him memorizing all the tones that he learned in the phone system. And when he was in college, he was a freshman, he would stand in front of a phone booth and charge $1 to connect a call to anywhere in the world. So people, he would say, I want to call someone in Bangkok, and he would dial it, he would whistle, he memorized, and he could whistle at the same frequency, 2,600 megahertz, taught himself how to do this, and would whistle a tone, and the phone would connect, and he would collect $1. He got arrested because of that. The phone company tried to give him a job, and he was an idealist, and he did not want to work within he wanted to give it to the man, so he didn't want to work for them. But he ended up recording all those tones into a little piece of plastic they called the blue box, and then he started selling them on the street. And that was what that's what gave Steve Jobs the idea for the power of ideas. He talks about it. He's like, when I knew that this little piece of plastic was hacking into the most powerful computer in the world, I knew what I was going to do. I knew where I was going to put my energy. So we wouldn't have Apple, we wouldn't have the internet, we wouldn't have the World Wide Web without people with disabilities. So it's not like we're asking for charity here because this little segment of the population needs help. That's bullshit. These are the people that drove the innovation in the first place. And now we've kind of just outgrown the standard.
Yeah.
And they've come out. So the next Joy Bubbles, or the next Steve Jobs, or the next Vince Cerf, who has a disability, is sitting at home right now as a 7-year-old in Pakistan or Bangladesh or wherever, and they're not using the web because we've forced them out of it. So their contribution is being removed from us, which is going to benefit us in the end, obviously, because we're not accessible. So that a bigger picture is We need to innovate as a human race, and we need the smart people to help us do that. And smart people aren't always able-bodied. They're not always like everybody else. They're different. That's why, and that's the other thing I've learned in this community. These people,
Genius.
And the drive, it's unbelievable. I met a guy who's a triple amputee from an accident, who runs his own business. All he has is one arm, but no legs at all. He's just a stump, and he sits in a specially made chair. He runs his own business, and he travels 365 days a year. He lives in hotels and airports, and I'm like, I complain about airports all the time. Heavy luggage lines. This guy has one arm, and he's traveling 365 days a year, and he's documenting every time he runs into an accessibility problem. He writes it down in his little blog and he tells the world about it.
Nice.
And it's, I mean, these people are the reason that I firmly believe that this is not just another little requirement we have to navigate, government regulation thing. This is bigger than all.
Well, and hearing you say that and being so impassioned about it, I'm thinking be growth driven. I mean, we're talking about people who make impact and have a drive. There's some future guests right there.
There you go.
Huge. We could talk about this for a long time, but I'm going to share this out. I know you are too, because everybody needs to know about this and start somewhere. Baby steps, something. But we can't be ignorant. Once you know, do something.
That's true. And the first steps, like I said, get someone to test your websites and get an idea for where your problems are. You probably have some if you haven't considered this before, but also adding an accessibility statement to your website. When people are taught how to use the internet as a disabled person, it's usually the state that comes out after an accident or an illness, and they say, okay, here's your technology that you're going to be able to use. We're going to train you how to use it and things like that. They're told when they run into a website and it doesn't work for them, look for help. Look for an accessibility statement, which is a statement saying the company knows that accessibility is a requirement. They're working on it. And if anybody has any issues, please email or call and we'll help you. And that's most of the lawsuits would go away if they just had someone to help them. But a lot of times there's nowhere to turn. And we know companies today that they don't even have phones. A lot of times there's no way to connect with somebody to get help when you actually need assistance. Out of the sales channel, it's hard to get a hold of people. And if you just get somebody who has been stuck in a call center, they don't know anything about this, and somebody says, hey, I'm blind and I can't use your website, what are they going to do? They don't know. So you want a little bit of training, of education, and I can help, with putting these little baby steps into your website to help to help these users.
Absolutely. That's like a catch-22 because we're so into the internet. Nobody answers their phones or has a call center, and you can't reach who you need to. And it's a huge circle of trouble.
Yeah, it can be frustrating.
We could talk for hours. No joke. Thank you for coming on today, Jason, and making time when you're getting ready to travel. We will definitely have you on again. I want to see how this works, and I want to make sure we are compliant and set the standard for anybody we work with to do the same thing. I know it's an initiative we have been talking about since we met you. So
that's great.
We appreciate your time. Glad to have you, and we'll connect. Anybody who needs to connect with Jason, let us know, or we put in the chat there his LinkedIn. Make sure you find out more. You cannot be ignorant once you know. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you, Audrey. I appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your afternoon. Now, let me see if I can work things here. Here we go. Now it's all Audrey. So join us next week for Be Growth Driven. We will have someone else who has information to share that is impactful to your life and your business and motivational too. I mean, that was very motivational. Let us know anything you have feedback-wise. We would love to hear, connect you. And again, we'll see you next week on Be Growth Driven. Let me see if I can work my screen, everybody.